Well, my guest is John Yep, the CEO of Catholics for Catholics. After 15 years as a missionary, he co-founded Catholics for Catholics in 2022, called by opposition media a new combative faith group designed to support frontline culture warriors who love God and the USA with the power of the Catholic faith. And in just 2 years, they have shaken the Catholic political landscape, as noted in the New York Times and Vanity Fair. They partnered with Turning Point Action in the last election to run an aggressive ballot-chasing operation, with the Federalist noted as the Catholic difference maker. And for their outstanding work, President Donald J. Trump wrote a public letter thanking Catholics for Catholics. And its board of advisors includes General Michael Flynn, former director of national security, and Jack Posobiec, of course, right here on Real America's Voice, and others. John has 2 master's degrees from Rome. He speaks 3 languages, and he's the recipient of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagle Award. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show, The Beau Show, John. We appreciate you being here.
Great to be here, Beau.
Well, thanks so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. We've obviously got a lot of news regarding the Pope coming out, and I want to talk, since you are a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, so sometimes I'm on the outside looking in, and you can give us some an inside glance. I want to talk about the significance of Pope Francis's passing and its profound implications for the Catholic Church and basically the world at large. His journey, of course, went from Argentina to the Vatican, and he was the first pope from Latin America. He placed an emphasis on social justice and calls for environmental responsibility and a commitment to interfaith dialogue. He did attempt to reform the church, addressing issues of clericalism, financial transparency, and the role of women. And there were, of course, some controversies that he faced, not the least of which were the role of women, and, of course, some of the sexual abuse scandals that we've seen dogging the church for a while. So first, John, if you would, give me an overview of Pope Francis, who he was, and his ascension to the papacy.
First of all, Beau, it's always great. I know you're not Catholic, but sometimes it's good for us, even Catholics, to talk to people outside our faith, because we can get in our own bubble and just look at this from our inside and not realize what you guys are all saying too. And your vantage point is important too. So, as far as the pontificate of Pope Francis, let's go back. We had in 2005, John Paul II dies, April 2nd, 2005. He is just completed one of the longest pontificates in the history of the Catholic Church. And in the late 90s, when John Paul was starting to get older, we of course remember John Paul. He was a great and just a stalwart against communism, worked with President Ronald Reagan to bring down the Iron Curtain, which they did. So a champion for human rights around the world. We love him, right?
Yep.
Now, he starts to get older. Okay, 2000. He's gonna in the group of cardinals started to meet in St. Gallen, Switzerland. This is documented in a book by one of the cardinals, Cardinal de Niels. Okay, who was the guy that actually showed up on the loggia on the balcony next to Pope Francis when he eventually came out. This is all background information, which is important to understand the Bergoglian Pope Francis papacy, which we've just ended. Right, so he gets They start to meet in St. Gallen, Switzerland. What are they meeting about? They start to plan who's going to be the next pope. Kind of raises eyebrows for Catholics. Why? Because number one, you're not really supposed to be campaigning. It's one of the rules, essentially. You can kind of soft talk, kind of, trade thoughts here and there, but an actual campaign, like we would understand it from a political perspective, no bueno. The church doesn't like that, right? And kind of condemns that. But they did, okay? So they were gearing up as far as the late 90s to meet. For what purpose? They were looking to put on the throne of Peter, obviously in non-Catholics know the Pope's not the head of the church. Jesus Christ is the head of the church. The Pope is the vicar of Christ. He's just a representative, man. So it's like he's a sinner, and we'll get into that in a second, because we've had kind of an embarrassing pontificate the last 12 years, a real kind of a scandal at times. But they wanted to get a liberal man on the chair of Peter, okay? So as far as the late 90s, that was the plan. Now, 2005, JP2, he passes away. They go into their conclave. Jorge Bergoglio, which is the name for Pope Francis, he got the second most amount of votes. And both, this is too much information. I can skip it and
no,
just fast forward.
It's interesting to me because I do want to get into the movie the Conclave, because it's so popular right now, and I just finished watching it, John. So this is important history. So please go ahead.
Yes, so he gets the second most amount of votes in that 2005 conclave. However, he does not win. Okay, who wins? Of course, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. So he's elected. And, obviously the progressive side, the liberal side of the church was, they weren't happy about that, right? So, but they had the assurance essentially that if they played their cards right, that Jorge Bergoglio would be the next pope when Benedict ended up doing what no one thought would ever happen. He resigned, right? It almost never happens. A pope resigns. But during that lead up, those 8 years or 9 years of the Joseph Ratzinger pontificate, they pretty much, this is the key, okay, the very lead. They knew that Pope Francis would be the Pope, okay, almost for sure, because they had the votes in the previous conclave. So 2013, Benedict resigns. I was there in Rome, by the way. I spent 5 years in Italy, so I remember this so well. He resigns. He goes off in the helicopter, off in the sunset, and we have a conclave. And Francis came out like a train ready for action. They had their agenda set for a long time. He comes out on the loggia, which is the balcony, right, where the Pope gives his first Urbi et Orbi blessing, and he basically he has a progressive agenda from the start. Okay, now this is like for non-Catholics, this is there's difference of opinions on theology which are like fit within the framework. Even like the saints debate back and forth. Nothing wrong with that at times, right? But when we saw with Pope Francis was an outright almost rejection of some core Christian principles that rightfully, if you were scandalized at times during the Pope Francis pontificate, you're probably reading the Bible, and that's a good thing because there were some rough moments. I'll pause there. I mean, Beau, if you have comments on that, or I can go deeper into that.
Give me an example, because you touched on something there that did some things that were theologically unsound. Give me an example or two of something Pope Francis did that you would say was so progressive that it might have been outside of the realms of biblical theology.
There's and skeptics will say, well, come on, it was just a casual interview here in an airplane. You didn't really think it out. Come on. There was an intentional, overall, weaponized ambiguity on the part of Pope Francis. And by the way, I'm the first one who's been praying for this man because like every Christian, we should have no hatred in our hearts. We want every someone to go to heaven. And the reason I'm not beating down on this guy who's dead already. I'm not trying to like take out this laundry list of sins. I'm doing it so that we don't make the mistake as many Christians do. Someone dies, it's like they're already like in heaven. They don't need our prayers, or it's they're the wonderful. No, they need our prayers, right? From the Book of Maccabees and St. Paul praying for the dead. So, Pope Francis. Let's take some examples. He on a consistent basis, it was weaponized ambiguity, which is a tactic, by the way, of quasi-communist philosophy from Peronism from South America, Argentina, where they would basically say things on both sides of the aisle. And it'd be kind of like, okay, gay marriage is bad, it's horrible. And then the other token, he would say it's fine, right? Or gender ideology is evil. And then he would raise up priests who were, promoting that nonstop and talking about, and also putting in charge of the doctrine of the faith, like the part of the Vatican, which oversees all Vatican doctrine. He would put someone who's there today who basically is making the point that at sometimes maybe gender transition for kids is morally okay. I don't think so. That's sick. It's demonic. Okay? So weaponized ambiguity. But here's a concrete example.
Okay.
In 2019, he goes to the Middle East. He meets with a bunch of other, faith leaders. Mostly, there was Jewish, but there was, leaders of Islam. And they come out of that and they sign a document. It's called the Abu Dhabi document, 2019 roughly. And in that document, Abu Dhabi is the city where they signed it. In the document is a key point. It says, God wills the plurality of all religions. Think about that. Let's break that down. What does it actually mean? Especially if you're a Catholic. That means that it doesn't really matter in God's eyes what religion you are. Okay, now you may believe that as a non-Catholic. Okay, we can debate that on the side. But if you're the Pope, let me just tell you how anti-Catholic that is. Because if it doesn't really matter what religion you are, what's the point of evangelizing? Like, who cares? It's just like it's all the same. Yes, are there non-Catholics that go to heaven? Of course there are. Absolutely. Are there non-Catholics who are holier than Catholics or closer to Jesus? Absolutely. And Jesus Christ himself in the gospel talked about the centurion who had more faith than all the children of Israel.
That's right.
Not denying that. However, the plurality of all religions, no. There, as Cat, we believe it's the one true faith. Okay, we debated back and forth, but that's an example, Beau, of just a real huge borderline heretical statement that he made.
It's interesting you bring that up, and I'm going to keep coming back to Conclave just because I finished it last night. Have you seen it, by the way?
No, I haven't seen it.
I wanted to watch it because I'm an actor, I'm a performer, and so like for me, the performances of Ray Fiennes and John Lithgow and these people were really significant. But something that happens in it, and you just touched on, and this is why I've got to bring this up because there's certain cultural cues. People are going to watch this movie, myself like included, a non-Catholic trying to watch what is the election of a pope like to get inside of that and to understand what's going on. In the context of their conclave, there's an explosion in Vatican City, and it was because someone had self-detonated a bomb. And what happened in that conclave was you had a very conservative-leaning person who was getting a lot of votes who said, you see, we're supposed to be accepting of all these faiths, and look what happens. We're supposed to bring these people in, and look what this Muslim person does. And it's at that point, ironically, where this guy that no one had even known about, who was a cardinal in, I believe it was Afghanistan, says, aren't we supposed to, as children of God, to be able to accept all people? He ends up winning the thing. So spoiler alert, but the reason why I have to say it is because what you're touching on seems to be this notion of, Pope Francis being an interfaith kind of guy, accepting of all faiths. Well, if you don't have a true north in your compass in terms of faith, what is the point of believing? And it sounds to me like what you're saying is this plurality, this notion of permitting all these different pluralities of religions means that it's okay whatever you believe. And I agree with you. I think that's anti-Christian because if there's nothing to believe in, what does it matter what you believe?
100%. And let's be really frank. This was not just all religions are equal, because at the same token, he promoted non-religions. Let me be specific. The October Amazon Synod in October of 2019, it was, to be blunt, it was essentially idol worship. He brought a statue of a pagan god, the Pachamama, okay? And brought it onto the steps of the most sacred altar in one of the most sacred altars in Christendom, on the altar of St. Peter, in St. Peter Basilica, and put it there. That's a pagan idol.
Why did he do that?
What's that?
Why did he do that?
God only knows. But what probably is what's happening is the de-emphasization of the importance of relativism. Okay, here it's been so destructive too, because if there is no point, if Jesus Christ is not the way, the truth, and the life, then and you promote other religions and Islam, or like I just said, a pagan deity, I don't even know where you stand. We have a great distinction in Catholic philosophy, moral ethics. Formal heresy, material heresy. Material heresy is essentially when you are saying things that are heretical. God is a combination of 10 persons. Heretical statement, a material statement. Formal heresy is when you know what you're doing. Okay? So ultimately, we won't know if what Pope Francis really understood what he was doing. Logic is he probably had to know exactly what he was doing, right? But that's why I'm saying some of the things that were done were so grave, and they required our prayers for this man and for the damage done to Christianity around the world.
So within the Catholic Church, then, John, I think I know where your perspective is, and it makes a lot of sense. There are some, of course, that are interviewed more by left-leaning media that say this pope was beloved. He was a pope of the people. He reformed the church. He had a different attitude towards those who were divorced and remarried. He had a more liberal view towards women, even though he didn't change doctrine on them. So what is it? What is the view overall, do you think, right now within the Catholic Church in posthumously looking at this pope who will be buried tomorrow? Do most of them look upon him as a progressive leader, as this is the future of the Catholic Church? Or do some, perhaps like yourself, say, this man's done a lot of damage to the papacy?
They can say those things, but statistics don't lie. Among the Catholics who go to church on a regular basis, and some go to daily mass. I try to go to daily mass too because I believe it's the Lord that we are able to receive every day. But among those who are church-going Catholics, the majority of them have a approval rating of Pope Francis, right? And yeah, there's also I'd like to point out a paradox too, um, that despite some of the crazy leadership coming from Rome, and also it's filtered down to the United States. Years now Catholic, you might be wondering too. My goodness gracious, why don't we have more Catholic bishops in the United States speaking up? Why were they saying things that were contrary to what President Trump was saying about the border and immigration? I mean, this is like
Right.
a Christian principle. You can defend your borders. Why were these? Well, they were nominated by Pope Francis. They were raised up. So despite this kind of weak, cowardly leadership at times among Catholic bishops, not all of them are bad, you have this groundswell of tremendous conversions back to the faith. I think Charlie Kirk had a great piece on this 3 days ago on his show, noticing this. There's been a huge influx. So,
That's right.
paradox that crazy leadership, but God's always working because the message of Christ is always attractive no matter who's in charge.
So what does this mean? You mentioned, you said that, yeah, there is this tremendous conversion. We are seeing, I think, and I think you would know this too in working with Turning Point Action, we're seeing a lot of younger people actually be inspired by faith, reclaim faith, which is very heartening. It's very inspiring to see that. Within Catholicism, I know J.D. Vance, for instance, he's a practicing Catholic. He said it appealed to his intellectual sensibility. As a Protestant, and again, I'd like for you to walk me through this too. You know, as a Protestant, I think about Martin Luther, the 95 Theses, and the things we don't do. That every time I sing in a Catholic church, for instance, for a funeral or for a marriage, there's a decorum to things, let's say. And when it comes to, let's say, divorcees, to the women's role in the church, to remarrying and things of that sort. Do the younger Catholics, do they see a need? Did they like Pope Francis because he was progressive? I mean, if you look at the future of the church and whoever's elected Pope next, and I'd like to get into that with in just a bit, but where is the direction? Are younger Catholics, are they more conservative, so to speak? If you want to call it that politically, where they believe in the foundations of traditional Catholicism, or do they want a more progressive approach?
Statistically, absolutely. No, they've been much more traditional. So the newer generation, even I read a recent polling that among, the disapproval rating about the Holy Father, where that changed, I think the older generation to a degree were a little bit more of an approval rating for Pope Francis, but the younger generation, those who are coming in, specifically males, by the way, had a much negative, and they lean completely conservative. And I also, you can kind of see a little bit of that reflected in the 24 election. We had the largest Catholic landslide in U.S. history. Remember, no president can ever win the White House without the Catholic vote. There was one exception in the past 60 years, and that was George Bush in 2000, right? But we saw, and it's usually like a 50-50 tie, Beau, on the Catholic vote. This time around, Trump took 58 to 40%. Just like mind-blowing numbers.
Huge.
That kind of reflects a little bit the trajectory of the American Catholic today. They're leaning more conservative, and I think that's a great thing because they want that tradition. They want when everything else in culture seems to be like shifting and what's for sure. I mean, gender, that's so even gender's fluid apparently, right? Well, what can I put my hope on and my faith on that will not change? Many have found that in the Catholic Church.
What are the things what is consequential about Pope Francis's papacy? You mentioned it is kind of being a stain, it sounds like. I'd like to know what you think his legacy will be, because you've mentioned a couple things that seem heretical. Obviously, you talk about the relativism, you talk about the pluralism. How do you think his legacy will be perceived? I mean, here we are, we haven't buried the man. People would say, why are you talking about it? But I think you have to, because you're looking at his life as being, and his papacy as being projected before he even got here. So and again, this is all documented kind of in Conclave as well, this political element of how a pope gets elected and what's required to do that. And you're enlightening me today to aspects I had not considered before. So what do you think Francis's legacy will actually be? Good, bad, neutral? How do you think people will view it?
I honestly believe this. I'm not trying to be biased here. I really think that later generations will reflect on this pontificate as being one of the most destructive in recent modern church history, and I don't say that lightly. And because of everything we just mentioned. That being said, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. and all things work for good for those who love God, Romans 8, right?
Yeah.
From this, we've already seen, like I just said with those statistics and those numbers, like why the conversions despite this crazy leadership. Um, so the Cardinals know what has happened. They do, even the ones that are lean more progressive, they understand how confusing this has been for the church. And Pope Francis, you can call him a reformer in that sense. He didn't, he stretched the bounds of papal infallibility to a way that no pope has ever done that. But they're gonna approach this, and we should be talking about it, both about the future of the church, because guess what? The Cardinals make a decision. They're talking about it. They already started their meetings 3 days ago, right? So we have to make our voices heard, and speak up, because this next pope has to, please God, bring it back more. And even on a geopolitical scale, I want to reference that quickly, Beau. Pope Francis also left some disasters out there. The Vatican agreement with, wait for it, the Chinese Communist Party, signed in 2018, where he ceded over to the CCP the right to name bishops. That has never been done.
That's wild.
By the Vatican to any. It'd be like saying to President Trump, "You name the bishops." In fact, that happened early on in this to Benjamin Franklin early on in the 1700s. The Vatican went to Benjamin Franklin and said, "Hey, would you like to name the bishops? Like, I was at do you want we have your tacit approval?" And Benjamin Franklin's like, "We could care less. This is America. Separation of church and state in that sense, right?" But that needs to be done, because he has sold out the underground church there in China, and we know the CCP has just persecuted Christians and non-Christians alike. So that's got to end. And the ambassador to the Vatican, appointed by President Trump, Brian Birch, said in his Senate confirmation hearings 2 weeks ago, that's one of the top issues they will bring up to the new pope is, hey, this thing with the CCP, let's got to end it.
Let me ask you this with regard to the sexual abuse scandals within the Catholic Church. Did Francis do enough? I think he received a fair amount of criticism. I believe he created a commission, a way in the law to be able to remove certain bishops. But, the movie Spotlight focused on this. That was with Michael Keaton, another movie that I watched about what was happening in Boston, the Boston Catholic Church, how priests were getting reassigned rather than actually removed. A, I'd like to know, did he do enough with regard to that? And B, if not, what needs to happen in the future with the next pope and the church in general to be able to address that specific issue?
Honest to God, he didn't. No, he did not at all. And let's go to examples. I mean, Theodore McCarrick, okay, who was laicized during the pontificate of Pope Francis. For those who don't remember, he is the most senior Catholic official ever to be removed from his titles. He was a cardinal, okay? Mm-hmm. And he had a 60-year history of abusing, seminarians, etc. That was just the small stuff. He is responsible for naming, they guesstimate, 20 to 30% of the current American bishops today, okay? And one of the, quote, sons of McCarrick was just promoted by Pope Francis shortly before his death to be where? The Cardinal of Washington, D.C., okay? Who he himself has not protected some of the flock in his care. Rachel Mastrogiacomo, friend of mine, a girl, had a priest do some horrible stuff to her. McMachery looked the other way. So did Pope Francis do no, he didn't. What can we do? Mm-hmm. We can be holy and we can keep speaking up, because things are changing. That's good. And I do want to say this, give some hope out there, because you may be like, why are you Catholic? It's a church full of men and women who are sinners, and we're here because we need Jesus. He is and Our Lady, right? So,
just to that point for a moment. Yeah, no, it did, but I'd like to go down that further, because again, and this is the difference between Protestant and Catholic. The church I go to, actually in Fort Lauderdale, their slogan is, "Where the less than perfect are more than welcome," and I've always liked that, because so often the reason why a person might not come to church or to mass is because they fear judgment. They fear, and of course there is biblical theology. We can't deny it. There is sin. We have to face it. We have to repent of those sins. We have to be more holy, even though we are imperfect people. But again, I think, from my perception, sometimes it seems like the Catholic Church can appear that way, as being kind of this holy body where you can't live up to the standard. And in my opinion, that's why Jesus came and suffered on the cross, is because to absolve that sin. But from a a structural point of view, the Catholic Church still looks like this institution, and you watch Conclave, and I was so interested to see how are these popes elected. They lock themselves in this room until they finally get it right, and there's a certain amount of politicking that goes into it. And then you hear about the abuse in the Catholic Church. Not that the Protestant Church is immune to that. It has happened in churches in Memphis, Tennessee, where I came from, where the pastor was having an affair on the side, was supposed to be a shepherd to the flock, and was counseling a female and was doing stuff with her. It's not like the Protestant Church is immune to that. So we are all sinners. Even our most high are still sinners. So you're right. Some people may look at this and go, well, why even bother with the Catholic Church? And I think it's, of course, a matter of personal faith than it is the structure of it. But I'd like you to speak to that and how the church can eradicate some of these issues that are within it, specifically with regard to the sexual abuse and even perhaps the role of women. And is that something you feel should be elevated in the clergy, or do you think that the theology should stay the same?
I believe the theology should stay the same, not because it's like a choice from man, but we believe it's what's been given to us by the church fathers and Christ himself. But as far as the judgment, I think this issue seeps into non-Catholic churches as well, or other Christian churches, denominations. The greatest disservice you can do to somebody at times is to not give them the truth. And whether that comes across with judgment, Christ told the rich young man, I mean, that had to have been hard moment. Like, the guy was doing pretty much everything he could to cross the T's and dot the I's, but Christ challenged him more, said, you got to do one more thing. And I think, we kind of pretend as a church that we welcome everybody, but people want the truth, okay? Because the truth will set them free, John 8:32, right? And that's why it's so important. And we cannot not speak the truth from the pulpits. Of course, we got to do it from love, at the point of love. That's why we're doing it. But the church, the theology, the role of women, what women have brought to the Catholic Church is insane. Starting with the person who gets the most respect after Jesus Christ in our church and honor is Our Lady, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Not because she's anything special in the sense of we don't essentially need Mary. We have Christ alone. Duh. We can just go right to Christ. But when you got a connection to the Mother of God, and she's at the foot of the cross. I mean, you show up at the foot of the cross, guess who's right next to you is Our Lady, right? So I think, the role of women is important, and we need to continue to have them center stage.
John, to kind of bring this conversation to a close, because you've been so enlightening, especially, and I think it is important, I agree with you, to have Protestant and Catholic sort of interfaith dialogue. What do you know about the conclave that's about to happen in terms of who's there, who has votes, who has support within the church? Who do you think the next pope is likely to be? Where will they come from? And where that will take the church. If you could look a little bit through the looking glass here and tell us where you think it's headed in terms of who you think they may elect.
The Pope was, let me back up. There's 135 roughly electors. So that means by Vatican rules, the one that's going to become or voted in needs to get about 90 votes. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that first round of votes is key. There are a couple front runners on both sides who could get the 90 votes. Cardinal Parolin is an example. He's the Secretary of State. Would not be a good choice in our humble estimation. He's also the architect behind the Vatican CCP Accords. So if he doesn't get 90 on the first round, what will probably, or one of the other front runners, what typically happens is then you're going to see them have to break up down into like someone in a level 2 category that can kind of create a consensus on where the votes might go. So kind of a clue is if after 2 days we still won't have a pope, 2 days into the conclave, then probably one of those front runners is not going to be elected, and they're going to have to shift down to a level 2. So we'll see. I run a group called Catholics for Catholics. Yeah. We're all about getting Catholics engaged to fight for America, make America great again, truly. We're from around the country. We are just praying like mad that the Holy Spirit can really help Christendom. Because we need this leader to be a true example of the Lord.
This guy you mentioned that you think is a front runner, that's the Secretary of State. You mentioned he's been involved in these CCP Accords. What is it? It sounds like he's got a lot of votes. He's got a lot of potential. That sounds like it's someone you would not, if you were there in the conclave, that you would vote for. Who would you actually like to see become the next pope?
Cardinal Raymond Burke is he's an American, which probably means he won't be elected because typically in church history they never elect a cardinal from one of the world's superpowers for prudential reasons, not to, so probably that won't be the case. Although we would love Raymond Burke. So next choice, Cardinal Robert Sarah from Africa. He is just a tremendous spiritual leader, humble, simple, and we think he could do a lot of good for the church. So do I think he'll win? Probably not. Realistically, with 60 to 70% of the cardinals being named by Pope Francis, we're probably going to get Francis II, I would guess. But you never know, right?
And you think it would be that Secretary of State that you mentioned, that he would be most likely
He's got
to
a
have
good
the most
chance.
votes? Yeah.
He's got a good chance. Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines also as well. I mean, there are other names like that floated out there. But, we'll see, and all eyes will be on that chimney, right, when the conclave starts around May 6th.
Yeah, well, but my final, dialogue here with you, I'd like, coming off of Easter, of course, one of the most significant, and if we call it a holiday, but it's a remembrance of what Christ did for us on the cross. It's interesting that Pope Francis died the day after Easter. It's significant, of course, and it gives the church body an opportunity to think about who they want to be. Within your context in your purview of what you do with Catholics for Catholics, in America right now, what's the biggest challenge facing Catholics in America? You've got the support of President Trump, who obviously has a certain component of faith to his presidency, particularly after the assassination attempt, 2 of them. He feels a renewed sense of a new lease on life, and I believe he's connected with his faith far more than he ever had. I believe you would agree with me, hopefully, on that. What is the plight then and the mission for Catholics in America specifically right now as we move forward in 2025?
Complacency. We won in November, but President Trump cannot do it all on his own. The other side is so aggressive, and they have so much passion for their cause. They will not sit back. They're not sitting back. Read the news. They're going after Peter Hegseth, and they continue down the row of officials and acts. Look what the courts have done to try to stop Tom Homan. So we have got to be engaged. Complacency is the killer, okay? Because this goes to our institutions. So how do you not be complacent? It starts with prayer. Everyone has got to pray every day. Silence, silence, silence. That's so key. Christ spent 30 years of his life in absolute silence, unknown from the world. It's from there that true zeal must spring forth. So that's what I would recommend to Catholics, and I try to do myself, and have that day begin with prayer, because God will speak. And also, to quote General Flynn, local action equals national impact. He's our senior advisor, Catholics for Catholics, General Michael Flynn. It's a great phrase to remember here.
And finally, John, because this has been a great conversation, where can people go to find more about you and Catholics for Catholics?
Google Catholics for Catholics, because with the grace of God, we've been in the New York Times, New York Post, and a lot of other newspapers the last few days with this. And what an honor, because we wanted to speak up for the truth, right? But otherwise, go to our website, forc.com. That's where we are going to find all our information there on our next action point on what we're up to.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for taking the time with me today. And from Christian to Christian, God bless you, and thank you for being with me.
Beau, thank you, man. Thanks for real for just being. I know you're not part of our faith, but just to cover this, and it's great to have this conversation, and look forward to more of these kind of things.
Yeah, and I'll pray for you. As someone told me one time, you could I could use the prayer and you could use the practice. So I'll make sure to to apply that too. Thank you so much, John.
All right. Later.
All right.